This is Ward Street in Nelson, British Columbia. The Victorian-era architecture and giant maple trees are a typical sight. While the charming aesthetics of Nelson are often admired, there is a subtle feature that often goes unnoticed: the tracks that run along the length of this sidewalk. In another neighborhood, you'll find a second set of tracks. And over here. Curiously, these tracks lead to nowhere. Despite their presence, there are no trains that pass through this part of the city. They serve no purpose other than to encase the concrete. In another part of Nelson, tucked away in a barn, rests a meticulously restored streetcar. It's easy to assume that these forgotten tracks belong to a streetcar system from a bygone era, and you wouldn't be far off. Yet, the true story these tracks tell is one of a community's unwavering determination to preserve a streetcar system that has teetered on the edge of collapse multiple times since the late 1800s.
Full comfort for 6 adults in a car that'll give you up to 30 miles a gallon.
For America's transit lines make their run safely and on schedule.
It's July 13th, 1898. Nelson's council receives a letter penned by Charles S. Drummond, a representative of the British Electric Traction Company. In his letter, Drummond conveyed the company's desire to extend their operations in Canada, as Nelson now appears to become large enough to support a street railway line. On August 1st, 1899, Drummond returns to Nelson to drive the first spike for the inauguration of the new streetcar system. This is a map of the initial streetcar line. Catering to Nelson's pedestrian traffic, the streetcar will provide access to the lower, mostly flat areas of the city and the southern neighborhood, characterized by its San Francisco-like hills. At this time, the streets are filled with horses, wagons, and carriages. Automobiles are a relatively new invention and not yet widely available to the general public. But for now, the clatter of Nelson's 2 streetcars would signal a new era of public transportation for Nelson. By 1904, the Nelson streetcars have been running for 5 years, but unfortunately, it was operating at a loss. It was at this point that the British Electric Traction Company convinced the city to take over through a 4-year lease agreement. On April 27, 1908, a fire wreaks havoc on the city's light and power services, along with the car barn and 2 of its streetcars. It isn't long before the power is back on, but it would take 2.5 years for the streetcars to come back into service. The introduction of the Model T Ford in October 1908 signals a new age of automobile ownership. By 1910, automobiles are making appearances in Nelson. Archie Bremner imports the city's first personal automobile, followed by Paul Nippou. By November 8, 1910, people would ride the streetcar once more, invigorated by an expanded uphill loop and pushing eastward, catering to a growing city. But the excitement of an operational streetcar is quickly diminished. A runaway car shuts the system down for another 6 months, while brakes and safety switches are installed. The streetcar again would find itself in financial difficulties, forcing the city to take over in 1913. Meanwhile, Ford is adopting an assembly line process, cutting manufacturing time down from 12 hours to 33 minutes. This would signal a new age in automobile ownership. Small buses called jitneys are making their way into other parts of Canada and beginning to chip away at the streetcar business. But for now, the streets of Nelson would still be dominated by horses and the streetcar would remain a necessity. As World War I unfolds, a recession looms. By 1919, the city's streetcar system is still facing significant losses, prompting political opinion. In 1920, Annie Garland Foster would become the first woman to join the city council, bringing financial success back to the streetcar system through discounted ticket books. By the end of the year, the streetcars had carried an astonishing 400,000 riders. But this success is hampered when on July 15, 1921, Uncle Wood, the car barn hand, accidentally switches the current to car number 2, causing it to nudge the snow sweeper through the north side of the car barn. While the snow sweeper could be repaired, the streetcar system, despite its prior success, would face financial challenges once again. A year later, in 1922, a local named Johnny Learmonth would build his own bus and start running trips in the area. Automobiles are becoming a common sight, with 375 registrations in Nelson by the end of 1923. Like many other parts of the country, Nelson's streetcar system was not spared from the harsh effects of the Great Depression. The economic downturn led to a significant decline in ridership, and the outdated technology of the streetcars posed challenges for maintenance. Replacement parts were scarce and had to be hand-forged. By the end of 1930, Nelson experienced a significant increase in the number of vehicles on its streets. It was perhaps this surge that prompted a period of reflection for the streetcar system, leading to the decision to rebrand the streetcar numbers 1, 2, and 3 to the new numbers of 21, 22, and 23. More buses are making their way into the area, including Canadian Greyhound lines, managed by John Learmonth, who, if you recall, built his own bus 17 years prior. Amidst a serious debate surrounding the potential replacement of streetcars with buses, the outcome sways in favor of retaining the streetcar system. During World War II, automobile technology advances significantly. Four-wheel drive, suspension systems, assembly refinements, and diesel engines emerge. Automobile ownership is rising. By 1945, Nelson would boast 1,125 registered automobiles and 500 commercial vehicles. Across the province, Vancouver would see their first trolleybus routes open on August 16, 1948. Buses, too, are replacing streetcars in other places in Canada, and Nelson was no exception. By 1949, another vote to replace Nelson streetcars with buses was put into motion and succeeded. By June 20th, 1949, Nelson's streetcar would run for the last time. But for many, the streetcar was more than just a way to get from point A to point B. As expressed by one person, it was an uplift to see one of our old cars come wobbling around the bend, knowing it would land us safely home, which in my case, it always did. For another, they shared, if they could talk, they would most likely say something like this: "I got you there and brought you back, through the rain and sleet and snow." Years would take its toll on the remaining streetcars. One would become a dressing room at an outdoor rink, while the others would become a greenhouse and eventually a kennel. Vandals would target the remaining streetcars, smashing windows and causing additional damage. In time, all but one of Nelson's streetcars are destroyed. The last of the tracks are sold off, though some may have been repurposed as sidewalk material on different streets, as it might have been cheaper than selling them off. Across the province, streetcar systems are being dismantled and replaced with buses. Victoria's last streetcar ran on July 5, 1948. Vancouver's last run was on April 24, 1955. Nelson's streetcar system, however, refused to surrender. In 1982, the local college secured funding to restore the last remaining car, streetcar number 23. By 1992, Nelson would see its streetcar running once more. These forgotten tracks are a reminder of the way things were, a necessity when time was slower. A unique aspect of a city's identity despite the modernization of automobile technology. A comforting clatter from a hard day's work, and a friendly reminder that you're home.
Well, every time we went to Baker Street to do some shopping, we would take the streetcar down to Baker Street and home. But the only thing I remember is that on occasion we would try to run out and grab the streetcar while it was running. Run after the car and try and grab a handhold here and there and make trouble. It takes an enormous amount of work with the volunteers. Last year, for instance, we did 11,000 hours of volunteer hours, and it's kind of a passion because it's part of Nelson's history. And the group down here, and we have 80 volunteers, and they have the same passion to try and keep the car running.